story. One day, I was in school for what seemed like an average Thursday. I was a senior in high school and in my third-hour history class. This was one of my favorite classes because the teacher, whom I'll call Mr. Smith, was really cool. For this story, I'll just call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was very laid back and would give us a lot of time to do homework in class. We rarely had any actual homework because we could get it all done before we left. He would teach for a bit at the beginning, and then the end of class would pretty much be like a study hall. We could talk, get work done, and he would even let us go on our phones or listen to music as we worked. On this day, it was a normal class period. I often had my headphones in as I studied, and I did on this day. We were working on our assignment, and I finished early. I would joke around with Mr. Smith sometimes, as did other students. I remember going up to him to turn in my assignment, and he asked me if I wanted to do him a favor. He said that he had to give back some iPads to another teacher. We had used them the previous day for a group assignment. There were about 10 iPads in this carrying case. I was happy to do this because it was something to do to get out of class. He wrote me a pass, and I took the iPad case. It was supposed to go to a teacher's classroom that was a little ways away. I left the classroom with my headphones still in, unpaused my music, and started walking through the empty hallways to the other teacher's classroom. At this point, there was probably about 15 minutes left of class. Soon, I reached the classroom that I was supposed to go to. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I could see through the window that all of the lights were off. I found this a bit odd, but quickly figured that the teacher wasn't there, probably not teaching a class during this hour or something. I turned around and started heading back to my classroom. I walked about halfway back when I saw something up ahead. There was a spot where two hallways intersected. A ways up, I saw a man whom I didn't recognize. He clearly wasn't a teacher, and I didn't think he worked at the school either. It struck me as suspicious right away. I only saw him for about a second or two because he passed by one hallway and into the other, not looking in my direction at all. The problem was that he was walking in the direction of my classroom. I kept walking, and when I got to where the man had walked past, I stopped and looked down the hallway. When I did, I saw the guy again. He was a long way down near where my class was, appearing as though he was looking for something. I didn't want to go down there, so I started walking in the opposite direction. I took out my headphones, and at that point, everything was silent. I didn't really know where I was going anymore, and was trying to figure out what exactly was going on. After walking around the empty hallways for about 5 minutes, I thought maybe the man was gone by then, and I started heading back to my class. When I got back to the hallway where I had last seen him, he was gone. I was just glad to see this, and I started walking down the hallway for my class. Just a few steps later, though, I heard footsteps coming from behind me and around the corner. They were going towards me, and there were some bathrooms right there, so I went inside. I didn't know who the person was, but I really didn't want them to see me. By now, I figured that they weren't supposed to be in the school. After going inside the bathroom at first, I just waited inside. When the footsteps got closer, I moved into one of the stalls. The guy passed by and did not go inside. I waited a little while longer before looking out of the bathroom. When I did, I saw that the person was a ways down the hallway once again, near where my class was. I left the bathroom and quickly tried to walk to the other hallway away from this guy. I must have been loud or something when I did, because, as I was walking, I heard movement behind me. I looked and saw the guy looking right at me. He turned and started walking in my direction. The guy was really far behind me, at least over 100 feet. I walked as quickly as possible out of that hallway and took another one. By this point, I just wanted to get out of the school or far. I walked down that hallway for a while and then took a left to another one, going to the stairs to go down to the first floor. As I approached the stairs, though I heard somebody coming up the stairs, I stopped and didn't know who this person could be. When they came into view, I saw that it was a police officer. He asked me what I was doing, and I asked him what was going on. He told me that the school was under a lockdown, and they were searching for a suspicious man. I pointed him in the direction that I had last seen him. Then I went downstairs and saw several more officers. I showed them my student ear, and we found a nearby classroom. I had to wait inside there until the lockdown was over. It lasted for probably about 15 more minutes, and then it ended. We were let out, and by then, it was time for the next class period. I'm not sure who that guy was or what he was even doing. I also don't know how he got into our school. I hadn't been able to hear that we were going into lockdown because my headphones were in, and I couldn't hear anything. Looking back, if I would have known, I would have tried to go into any classroom. I don't know what would have happened to me if that guy caught up with me either, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. Story to cheer. This happened when I was in high school. For some context, I am a female and was a junior at the time. I used to walk to and from school every day since I lived quite close. The walk usually took about 10 to 15 minutes, and I followed the sidewalks for the most part. One morning, I left around 7:30 a.m. because school started at 7:50. As I walked out the front door with my backpack, I noticed a car on the side of the street, right in front of the sidewalk I usually passed. It was an older, dark grey BMW, and the driver, a young-looking guy, seemed a bit older than me. The passenger side window rolled down, and he asked if I needed a ride to school. I had never seen him before and didn't think he attended my school. He claimed to know Erica, one of my best friends, and said he was giving her a ride. I declined, feeling uneasy. He asked why, and I replied, maybe. I wanted to confirm with Erica if she knew him. The guy seemed disappointed but drove off. I walked the rest of the way to school, texting Erica about it. In my first hour English class, the school went into lockdown. It was the first time we experienced this, and we were instructed to sit quietly at the back with the lights off. After about 20 minutes, the lockdown was lifted. I later learned that a man had entered the school, prompting the lockdown. Despite a search, he managed to escape. After school, as I walked home, I saw the same car again. The creepy guy, claiming to have been in my school during the lockdown, bragged about escaping. He got out of his car, and I ran, but he chased me. Fortunately, a classmate named Matt drove by, and I got into his car, escaping the stalker. I called the police, and they located the man later that day. He had been stalking me for days, posing as a student. I'm grateful for Matt's timely intervention. Who knows what could have happened to me? Story 3. Not too long ago, I was a teacher, and this incident occurred a couple of years back. It happened during my 4th year of teaching at the high school where I still work. I teach math and have 4 different classes throughout the day, which kept me quite busy with teaching, preparing lessons, and grading assignments. About a month into the school year, during the first hour of the day, I was teaching as usual. I was in the middle of explaining a problem on the whiteboard when the phone rang in my classroom. I paused and walked over to answer it. I was informed that the school was being locked down, but the reason wasn't disclosed. The announcement came over the school intercom, and some students in my class started asking about the cause of the lockdown. I didn't have the answers, but I followed protocol by turning off the lights and locking the doors. I instructed the students to move to the back of the classroom. Despite complying, they were curious about why we were in lockdown. It wasn't a drill, and even I was puzzled. I sat at my desk, and we all waited anxiously. After what felt like an eternity, about 10 minutes, my cell phone started vibrating on my desk. It was a number I didn't recognize. Initially hesitant, I considered ignoring it, but thinking it might be related to the lockdown, I answered. A man spoke professionally, informing me that I was needed in the principal's office immediately. When I asked why, he insisted it would be discussed there and hung up, leaving me bewildered. My students looked at me, questioning what I was told on the phone. One student asked, and I explained someone wanted to see me in the principal's office, but I didn't know why. Debating whether to go, I got up and walked to the door. Glancing out the window into the empty hallway, I noticed a man in all black, wearing a ski mask, standing far to the left. Alarmed, I returned to the students and decided not to go. I told them to stay at the back, joining them. I had no idea who the person was, but a ski mask didn't bode well. The silence lingered and minutes felt like hours. Another call from the same unknown number came, but I ignored it. They called again, prompting me to turn off my phone. We waited in the classroom for almost an hour. Finally, another call came, signaling the end of the lockdown. An announcement followed over the intercom, indicating that class was over. I let the students out. Later, I learned the unsettling truth about the lockdown. The person in the ski mask was a former student of our high school and one of mine whom I had failed. He had returned to the school, even calling me on my cell phone. I don't know how he got my number, but he was trying to lure me out of the classroom, possibly with harmful intentions. Fortunately, he was spotted by a faculty member, prompting the lockdown. The police located and apprehended him. Although he managed to evade them for a while, even today, I can't shake the thought of what might have happened had I left the classroom. It was a chilling and surreal experience that will stay with me forever. Story phrasing. Back in high school, I used to believe that lockdown drills were unnecessary in our small town since nothing ever happened. However, I soon realized how wrong I was, and I'll always be grateful for those drills. They likely saved many lives in my grade, especially during our pre-prom assembly. The assembly, which we had heard was boring from the seniors the previous year, took an unexpected turn. Just 5 minutes into Miss Belmont's speech on the dangers of drinking and driving, chaos erupted. It's been 4 years, but the memory is vivid. Miss Belmont was on stage, preparing to show a video when the tranquility was shattered by the unmistakable sound of gunshots echoing from the hallway. Our auditorium, located right inside the main entrance, became the center of a horrifying event. Around 200 high school juniors fell silent as everyone quickly lowered themselves into their seats, hoping they had misunderstood the situation. Before anything else happened, Miss Belmont, calm and collected, instructed us to follow the lockdown protocols. Our attention shifted to the teachers on stage, gesturing for us to rise from our seats and move up the stairs next to the stage. Surprisingly, we managed to stay calm, following the teacher's directions, forming lines on the stage. The room filled with hushed muttering as worry spread, and I searched for my friends. One of the teachers guided us to an emergency exit on the other side of the curtain. We exited, following the protocol, into the hallway between the auditorium and the music classrooms. Our goal was to enter those classrooms and lock the doors while waiting. I found myself toward the front of the line, feeling the teacher pull me forward to keep the line moving. As we stepped into the hallway, we froze. The gunman had circled around the auditorium and was now staring down the corridor where we stood. Panic set in, and we rushed back into the auditorium, yelling that the shooter was in the hallway. Shots rang out, hitting the walls near where we had just been standing. Back inside, the teacher barricaded the door just in time. With a ladder, he secured it, and we heard the shooter attempting to force it open. Another teacher worked to secure emergency exit. For agonizing minutes, shots echoed through the school, the gunman seemingly moving farther away each time. However, the fear persisted that he might return. 9 minutes later, the police arrived, clearing the school and apprehending the substitute teacher turned shooter without firing a single shot. Although the greeters and the school security guard were injured, they made full recoveries and still work at the school. That day, during what should have been a routine assembly, remains the most terrifying experience of my life. Story farce. During my sophomore year of high school, I learned the importance of keeping at least one ear open when in public. By that, I mean not having both headphones on when outside the house. This lesson came to me during a study hall when I had my soundproof headphones on. I kept them on, even when I ran to the bathroom between classes. It was during this time that the lockdown bell rang, notifying all students to get into the nearest classroom due to an unknown adult on the premises. With my headphones blocking out the world, I walked out of the bathroom into a cleared-out hallway. assuming I missed the bell. Anticipating trouble for being late, I sighed and started walking down the hall. As I turned a corner, I noticed a man standing in the hallway, looking around. When he saw me, he immediately pointed in my direction. Thinking I was in trouble, I took my headphones off, apologized, and explained I was on my way to class but got held up in the bathroom. The man insisted on escorting me to class to talk to the teacher. While walking towards my class, I felt a weird vibe from this guy. He kept looking down at me but remained silent. As we reached the stairs for my trigonometry class, instead of going up, he continued down the hall. It struck me that, unlike the school staff, he had no badge or name tag. Concerned, I asked what class he taught. His response was dismissive, and he placed his hand on the back of my neck, insisting I not question him. Wary, I realized he wasn't taking me to class. Seeing an entrance, I sensed he was trying to get me to leave the building. With little time, I started walking faster, creating distance. The moment I felt a gap, I spun to the right and sprinted past him, back down the hall. Reaching the staircase, I heard his footsteps chasing me. As I reached the top of the stairs onto the second-floor hallway, 2 security guards were looking for the intruder. I alerted them, and they ran towards me. The man descended the stairs, pursued by the security guards. A teacher across the hall signaled for me to enter their classroom. I did so quickly, spending the rest of the lockdown waiting for the confirmation that the school was safe. My parents were called, and I had to speak with the police. By the end of the day, the man was arrested, attempting to sneak through backyards in town. They believed he was trying to make it back to his house, also in town. Since then, I always pay attention to any announcements when I'm out. Story 6. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky where the landscape was quite rural and the actual city, let's call it City C, only had one stoplight. Even in 2019, the area remained peaceful, and it felt as if everyone knew each other. While this story doesn't involve the paranormal, it is extremely terrifying. A real-life nightmare, if you will. The story begins on September 18th, 1989, in the county's only high school. Both of my parents were teachers at this school. My mother happened to be in her planning period, sitting in the teacher's lounge with a few other personnel. Their planning was cut short when a fellow female teacher ran screaming into the teacher's lounge, stating, "He's got a gun. He's got a gun." Understandably, the teacher was too distressed to explain in detail and immediately ran screaming. Everyone immediately scrambled to escape or hide from the gunmen. My mother, a fellow teacher, and a teacher's aide ran into a small closet and attempted to hide. The closet was tiny and, along with 3 small women currently occupying it, was also home to a fold-away bed. No matter how hard they tried to close the door, the bed kept getting in the way. They were afraid to open the door and shove the bed out, as it would be a dead giveaway that someone was in the closet. After the initial shot, things began to quiet down in the school. They could hear a few shots fired, but had no idea how close the gunfire was in proximity to them. They literally crammed like sardines in a hot closet, unsure when or if the shooter would come for them. Though they tried to remain silent, my mother did make a plea for their salvation, as it was almost certain they wouldn't make it out of the school alive. The time ticked away slowly, and after an hour of being in the closet, they began to hear footsteps. The footsteps were slowly coming down the hallway toward the room they were in. Soft sounds clicking as if someone was searching around the hallway. As they came closer, the footsteps stopped in the doorway of the teacher's lounge. It was almost as if they could feel a pair of eyes searching the room from top to bottom, looking for any sign of life. My mom and the other woman had their hands on the doorknob, trying to keep it closed as much as possible. They were almost certain this was the end. Suddenly, they heard the person walk away and enter a nearby bathroom. My father also had a free first block, so he was seated at his desk trying to catch up on grading student assignments. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise, which he said sounded like a large table falling over. He wondered what the sound might be, but figured it was simply a table that had gotten knocked over. or someone had dropped several textbooks. Unlike the teacher's lounge, my father's classroom was located upstairs in a smaller portion of the school. While he continued grading papers, he began to hear someone running down the hallway. It was a teacher that seemed to be searching through the classrooms. He stopped in the doorway and said, "One of the kids brought a gun and has taken hostages. We need to evacuate the other classmates immediately." My dad quickly said, "I'll take the right side of the hall and you take the left." They then set off running down the hall to notify teachers and students. However, most of the classrooms had already been emptied. They would find out later that many of the classrooms had heard the initial gunshots and realized instantly what the sound was. The first-floor classrooms had tried to evacuate by either running to the far stairwell or jumping out the windows into the parking lot. The classroom doors had small windows in which you could see people passing outside. The classroom that was located across the gunfire had been too scared to exit into the hallway at risk of being shot. The students were all jumping out of the windows in droves. The poor teacher was heavily pregnant, and the windows were quite narrow and only slanted slightly when they opened. It took a great deal of effort, but they got her out of the window. The students and teachers were scared for their lives, not knowing if the shooter would suddenly barge into their room and begin shooting as they tried to exit. My dad eventually located a classroom that had not been evacuated. He ran over to the teacher and explained the situation. He then spoke to the students and told them, "You need to exit the school right now. Don't take your belongings, don't go to the bathroom, don't talk to anyone. As quietly as you can, take the far stairwell and don't look behind you. Go now." My dad is likely one of the most laid-back individuals you could ever meet. The students knew this and listened closely, knowing the situation was dire. Everyone rushed to the far stairwell, away from the gunman, and exited to the bus garage. Dad said that the police arrived within minutes of them emptying the building and crawled everyone over to a funeral home that was across the road from the high school. Within 30 minutes, a SWAT team arrived and had set up a perimeter both inside and outside of the school. A family member had found out about the situation and called my grandfather, my mother's father. He had rushed to the school to check on his daughter and son-in-law. As my dad was waiting with the students in the funeral home parking lot, he began to search for my mother. My father asked one of the teachers that had been in the lounge with my mom if he had seen her. He said he thought she was outside. Dad once again searched through the crowd, asking if anyone had seen my mother. By this time, my grandfather had arrived and asked my father where my mom was. He said that he couldn't find her. He again asked the teacher who had been in the lounge with her, and he said, "Well, come to think of it, I remember her saying that she might hide in the closet." Everyone was terrified of what might have happened to her, since it had been close to 3 hours since the gunman had entered the building. My father and grandfather notified some of the Kentucky State Police that were on the scene under the watchful eyes of snipers located in the parking lot and on the roof. The KSP officers entered the school and headed for the closet they thought my mother was in. My mother said that she and the other woman could hear someone outside, and they almost died of fright. Without announcement, the doorknob was suddenly ripped from their hands and light flooded into the closet. Not hearing a cacophony of gunfire, my mom looked up and realized there were 2 armed state troopers standing outside the closet. She said that it was probably the best sight in her entire life. There was no time for tears of joy, though. The officers told my mother and the other 2 women, "You're going to be okay, but we need to get you out of the building ASAP. We need you to rush down the hallway, and when you come into the lobby to exit." After a count, my mother was ushered from the teacher's lounge toward the high school lobby. She said when she rounded the corner, there were multiple snipers set up in the hall, along with a .50 caliber machine gun pointed at the classroom where the shooter was. That day, my mother had worn a dress and heels, and she said she could remember trying to run across the grass in her heels, getting stuck in the soil. She kept running through until she joined the others in the funeral home parking lot. 50 over had begun around 9:50 a.m. during the first block of classes. The shooter had entered the school with 3 guns. one shotgun A357 pistol and A44 caliber Magnum. He walked into his first block. Upon entering the classroom, he shot into the ceiling through the arc classroom located above. Luckily, no one was hit by a bullet or debris of the initial shot. He released 2 rows of students and the teacher before settling in for a standoff. The woman that initially told everyone in the teacher's lounge about the shooting had been the teacher released from the classroom. Over the next few hours, students were released for small requests like cigarettes, soft drinks, and pizza. Multiple shots were fired throughout the ordeal, but thankfully, no one was injured or killed. The shooter was later identified as a 17-year-old student at the high school. He advised police that he would surrender if he could see his father. He told police that he hadn't seen his father since he was 4 years old. Around 5 p.m. that day, the last hostage was released. The Kentucky State Police eventually negotiated his surrender before his father could arrive from Florida. While most people never know the reason behind such an insane act of violence, upon questioning, the shooter referred to the Stephen King book Rage as his inspiration for the shooting. Crazy enough, my dad didn't think the student served any prison time. It was his belief that while the boy was initially taken to jail after surrendering, he was never tried and was instead released out of the county and told never to return. I guess 1989 was a different time. My dad says that word had quickly spread after the takeover, and many parents had arrived at the scene looking for their children. One of them asked my father where his son was, and my dad wasn't sure. That's what he told the parent. However, he had been too afraid to tell him that he thought he was currently being held hostage. It turns out he was. Many of the students held hostage suffered from PTSD and had to undergo counseling for many years. Fortunately, no one was physically harmed. Though once my parents were finally released from the scene, they had driven straight to my babysitters to pick being less than a year old. I was oblivious to the chaos that my parents had experienced that day. They say when they saw me, they picked me up and prayed that the little girl would never have to experience anything like that.